Good morning, everyone. Going to resume our daily Bible readings by reading from 1 Samuel chapter 13. In the book of 1 Samuel, so far, we have seen as Samuel becomes judge of Israel. He supplants the family of Eli in the judgeship. We see him judging justly and winning victories, and yet we see the Philistines coming and oppressing Israel. We see Israel choosing to reject the judgeship of Samuel, to reject the command of God, and instead to choose their own king. God, in his graciousness, chose a king, Saul, in the image of the king that they wanted. But as we see in 1 Samuel chapter 12, King Saul was not the man who God had planned to found the dynasty that would rule his people. Saul was in many ways a great man, but he was also in some ways a sinful man. And in this scripture we see him making an illegal sacrifice to God. We know that it isn't just the intention of worship of God that is important, it is also the obedience of worship of God. So we can intend to worship God sincerely, but if we do not pay attention to his word and do what he tells us, then that worship is disobedient and angers rather than pleases God. And Saul angers God by offering disobedient worship. We see Jonathan, a great and admirable figure, and yet a man who was not destined by God to sit on the throne. It's interesting to see that although Saul was condemned very understandably for his sin, David's sin was forgiven repeatedly by God. David was not a holy, perfect man, very, very far from it. He did lots of bad things in his reign, and yet God forgave him. And I think that shows us the importance of God's choice, that while God does not forgive those people who are not part of his chosen, he does forgive people who are. So the sins of Christians are forgiven, where the sins of non-Christians would be held against them. Jonathan wasn't destined to take the throne. Well, he was not chosen to do that thing in spite of his great qualities and in spite of the way in which we may think he would be very well qualified for kingship. So what we see here is the beginning of the freeing of God's people, which Saul is going to effect under God's command. And yet we also see that while he will remain king for 20 years after this perhaps, he will not found the dynasty which will rule God's people forever. Because of course Christ sits on the throne of David. He is David's great son. We see the Philistines being defeated in one battle, and then we see them preparing for much greater battles, which we'll read about in the future as we go through this book, 1 Samuel. This is God's word. 1 Samuel 13. Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel also was had in abomination with the Philistines. And the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. And the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and as people as the sand which is on the sea, sure in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves and in thickets and in rocks and in high places and in pits. And some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. And he tarried 7 days, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, Bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Samuel went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, What hast thou done? And Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be a captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. And Samuel arose, and gat him up from Gilgal unto Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. And Saul and Jonathan his son, and the people that were present with them, abode in Gibeah of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped at Michmash. The spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned unto the way that leadeth to Ophrah unto the land of Shul. And another company turned the way of Beth-horon. And another company turned to the way of the border, that looketh to the valley of Zeboim towards the wilderness. Now there was no smith found throughout the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, Lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines, to sharpen every man his shear, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. So it came to pass in the day of battle, that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and with Jonathan his son was there found. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash.